At 46. Nora Whitaker had spent 17 years cleaning the Majestic Theater after everyone else went home, scrubbing floors beneath posters of famous performers while barely earning enough to keep her own life together. She had survived a painful divorce, years of financial pressure, and the quiet humiliation of being treated as though the work she did mattered only when it wasn't done. Then Arthur Bell, the 81-year-old owner of the century-old theater, died and made a decision so strange that even Nora thought there had been a mistake. Instead of leaving the Majestic to his family, Arthur left the entire theater, everything inside it, and its modest operating account to the woman who had cleaned it for 17 years. His nephew was furious. People around town couldn't understand it. Some wondered what Nora had done to convince an elderly employer to hand her a property carrying more repairs and responsibility than she could possibly afford. Nora herself considered selling before the building swallowed what little financial security she had left. But then she found something Arthur had left behind, his personal ring of keys, which won to a basement he had kept locked during the final years of his life. Arthur had been going down there repeatedly before his death, and no one seemed able to explain why. Everyone assumed the basement was filled with old scenery, costumes, broken furniture, and forgotten theater props. But when Nora finally opened the door, she discovered carefully organized shelves, dozens of boxes labeled with the names of ordinary employees, and one box that stopped her cold. Written across the front was her own name, Whitaker, Nora, 17 years. What Arthur had preserved beneath the Majestic would reveal why he had changed his will, why he had chosen a cleaning woman instead of his own family, and what he believed the theater was truly worth. But the most important thing waiting in that basement wasn't money, valuable memorabilia, or anything Nora could sell. And when she finally discovered what Arthur had been collecting for all those years, she understood that he had noticed something about her life that even she had never believed was important. Before we open that box with Nora, tell us in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there right now. Wherever you are, I hope you're having a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening. And if you enjoy emotional stories about ordinary people, hidden histories, and discoveries that change everything, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. Now, let's go back to the Majestic Theater, where Nora Whitaker was beginning what she believed would be another ordinary night of cleaning, unaware that before the night was over, she would learn that Arthur Bell was dead, and that the locked basement beneath the theater was about to change the meaning of 17 years of her life. Nora Whitaker arrived at the Majestic Theater 20 minutes before her evening shift, carrying a paper cup of coffee and expecting nothing more difficult than spilled soda and muddy footprints. The marquee lights were dark. That was unusual. Marcus Reed stood inside the lobby beneath the brass chandelier, his work gloves hanging from one hand. Marcus? Nora unlocked the glass door. Why aren't the lights on? He looked at her for a moment. Arthur died this afternoon. Nora stopped with the key still in the lock. What Helen Carver called me. Said it happened earlier today. Marcus lowered his voice, although the lobby was empty. He was 81, Nora. I know how old he was. She hadn't meant to sound sharp. She set her coffee on the ticket counter. Was he sick? Not that I knew. Neither spoke. Nora looked toward the staircase leading to the balcony. For 17 years, Arthur Bell had been part of the building as reliably as the red velvet seats and cracked gold trim. He wasn't warm exactly. He corrected crooked posters, complained about wasted electricity, and could identify a burned-out aisle bulb from the back row. Yet he noticed things other employers ignored. When Nora's vacuum began making a grinding noise, Arthur replaced it before she asked. During holiday shifts, he would pass her in the lobby and say, "You ate something, didn't you once?" when an elderly usher's knees worsened. Arthur quietly placed a chair near the auditorium doors and pretended it had always belonged there. "What happens to the theater?" Nora asked. Marcus shook his head. "No idea." That question followed Nora through her work. The Majestic had struggled for years. Everyone knew it. Some weekends filled the auditorium. Others barely covered the cost of opening the doors. Without Arthur, there was no guarantee anyone would keep paying cleaners or maintenance workers. Nora pulled on her gloves and began with the auditorium because routine was easier than thinking. She collected cups from beneath seats, swept popcorn from the aisles, and wiped fingerprints from the railings. In the balcony, she reached row B and stopped at seat 14, Arthur's seat. He had watched performances there whenever he attended, usually alone, arms folded as though personally responsible for every missed cue. Nora brushed crumbs from the cushion even though there were almost none. 17 years, she whispered. She remembered arriving at the Majestic after her divorce, with bills stacked on her kitchen table and every intention of keeping the cleaning job only until something better appeared. 17 years later, she was still here. The job had paid rent when money was tight and given her somewhere dependable to go when the rest of her life felt less certain. Arthur had provided that stability without ever knowing what it meant to her. Or perhaps he had known. Nora realized she had never thanked him for it. Downstairs, Marcus was checking a leaking faucet in the staff restroom. "Feels strange," he said when she passed. "Like he'll walk in and complain we're standing around?" Nora managed a small smile. "Then stop standing around. That's more like him." Later. Nora emptied the office trash and automatically glanced at the wooden hookboard beside Arthur's desk. Arthur kept spare keys there, each tagged in his narrow handwriting. Dressing rooms, projection booth, storage, basement. Nora frowned. The basement hook was empty. Arthur had kept that door locked, and during the past year, Nora had occasionally seen him coming upstairs from below. She had assumed he was checking storage. "Marcus," she called. He appeared in the doorway. "Do you have the basement key?" "No, it's not here." Marcus looked at the empty hook. Arthur probably had it with him. Nora stared at the word basement beneath the vacant peg, wondering why its absence bothered her. Her phone rang inside her pocket. Unknown number. She nearly ignored it, then answered. "Nora Whitaker?" a woman asked. "Yes." "Ms. Whitaker, this is Helen Carver. I was Arthur Bell's attorney and executor." Nora straightened. "Marcus told me what happened. I'm sorry to call you this evening, but there's a matter Arthur left instructions for me to handle promptly." Nora looked once more at the missing basement key. "What matter?" Helen paused. "I need you to attend the reading of Arthur Bell's will." The next afternoon, Nora sat in Helen Carver's office with her hands folded over the purse in her lap, wondering why Arthur's will concerned her at all. She had almost brought her final timesheet, assuming Helen might need it before the estate settled unpaid wages. Across the room sat a man Nora recognized from occasional visits to the Majestic. Julian Bell, Arthur's nephew. He wore a dark jacket and kept checking his watch when Nora entered. His surprise had been obvious. "You worked for my uncle," he said finally. 17 years? Cleaning? Yes. Julian nodded without replying. Helen entered carrying a folder and took the chair behind her desk. "Thank you both for coming." Arthur's instructions were specific about handling this promptly. Julian leaned forward. "Is there anything unusual we need to know before you begin?" Helen opened the folder. "Yes." Nora felt suddenly uncomfortable. Helen explained several ordinary provisions first, none involving Nora. Then she paused. "Regarding the Majestic Theater property, including the building, its contents, and the operating account associated with the theater." Mr. Bell named a single beneficiary. Julian's posture relaxed slightly. Helen looked directly at Nora. Nora Whitaker. Nora waited for the rest of the sentence. None came. I'm sorry Arthur left the Majestic Theater to you. Nora stared at her. That can't be right. Julian gave a short laugh, but there was no humor in it. Exactly. Helen turned the document so they could see Arthur's signature. There is no clerical error. I'm his nephew. Julian said, The theater has been in the Bell family for generations. I'm aware. And he gave it to his cleaner. Nora felt heat rise into her face. I didn't ask him for anything. Julian looked at her. Did you know he was planning this? No. Did you ever discuss his estate? Never, Julian, Helen said firmly. Arthur made this decision himself. When Helen checked the document, this version of the will was executed 18 months ago. Nora looked up. 18 months? Yes. Julian stood and walked toward the window. Was he competent? Entirely. I met with him privately. He understood the property, the beneficiaries, and the consequences of his decision. Then why would he do this? Arthur did not authorize me to speculate about his motives. Julian turned toward Nora. Maybe she can. Nora tightened her grip on her purse. I can't explain something I didn't know about. You spent more time in that building than most of his family. Because I worked there. 17 years is a long time to work for someone. And not once did Arthur tell me he planned to leave me a theater? Helen waited until Julian sat again. The inheritance is not simply a valuable asset. The Majestic has ongoing obligations. She placed another sheet before Nora. Insurance, property taxes, payroll, utilities, deferred maintenance. Nora scanned the figures and felt her stomach tighten. She knew the roof needed attention. Marcus had mentioned aging electrical panels. The plumbing seemed to develop a new complaint every month. There's money in the operating account? Nora asked. Yes, but it is modest. Enough to provide continuity, not enough to eliminate the theater's financial problems. Nora almost laughed. 17 years earlier. After her divorce, she had taken a cleaning job because she needed predictable income. Now, that same job had somehow handed her an entire building capable of producing bills larger than anything she had ever faced. Can I refuse it? She asked. Julian looked at her sharply. Helen nodded. You have legal options. You do not need to decide today. Julian leaned back. If she doesn't want it, does it return to the family? That would depend on the estate provisions and the course she chooses. We are not resolving that now. Nora looked down at Arthur's signature. She should have felt fortunate. Instead, she felt as though she had accidentally walked onto a stage in front of an audience waiting for her to prove she belonged there. Julian's anger only made the feeling worse. People are going to think I did something, she said quietly. Helen understood immediately. Arthur's decisions were his own. That won't stop people. Julian's expression shifted, though not enough to become sympathy. You have to understand what this looks like. Nora met his eyes. I do. Probably better than you think. Helen closed the folder. There is one more thing. She opened a small envelope and emptied a heavy ring of keys onto her desk. Nora recognized Arthur's handwritten tags immediately. Office, projection booth, dressing rooms, storage. Her attention stopped on a key larger and darker than the others. Helen lifted the ring and held it toward her. Arthur instructed that these pass to the new owner with the property. Nora took them. The metal felt unexpectedly heavy in her palm. She turned the ring until the final tag faced upward. The same word she had seen beneath the empty hook in Arthur's office was written across it in narrow black letters. Basement. 2 days later. Nora sat behind Arthur Bell's desk with a stack of invoices arranged in front of her and felt as if she were trespassing. She had cleaned this office hundreds of times. She knew which drawer stuck in humid weather and which corner collected dust behind the filing cabinet. But sitting in Arthur's chair was different. "You look uncomfortable," Evelyn Price said from the doorway. Nora glanced up. The retired box office manager had worked at the Majestic for more than 30 years before retiring. "I am uncomfortable." Evelyn entered and looked at the paperwork. "Arthur wasn't born sitting in that chair. His family owned the building. That doesn't make chairs hereditary." Nora almost smiled. Helen had given her access to the theater's operating records while the estate transfer proceeded. The numbers were worse when viewed together. Roof repairs had been postponed twice. An electrician had recommended replacing an aging panel. Plumbing repairs appeared every few months, and ticket revenue varied enough to make payroll frightening. "This isn't an inheritance," Nora said. "It's a list of expensive things waiting to break." Evelyn pulled up a chair. "The Majestic has always been expensive. Arthur knew what he was doing. I know how to remove gum from velvet without ruining it. You also know which doors swell in summer, which pipes freeze first, and where Marcus keeps the emergency shutoff wrench. Those aren't owner qualifications. They're more useful than knowing where to sit on opening night." Nora looked around Arthur's office. "I feel like an imposter." Evelyn's expression softened. "You know this building better than most people who've claimed importance inside it." That afternoon, Julian Bell arrived without calling first. Nora found him standing in the lobby beneath the chandelier. "I wanted to speak without lawyers," he said. "About what?" "The theater." He handed her a folded sheet. It was an offer to purchase the Majestic if Nora accepted the inheritance and transferred it to him. The amount looked substantial until Nora remembered the building's problems. "You're moving quickly because this doesn't need to become ugly. I never wanted it to become anything." Julian sighed. "My uncle made an emotional decision. Maybe he felt grateful to you, fine, but owning this place isn't the same as cleaning it." The words stung because they matched Nora's own fear. "I'm aware. Then sell it to me. You walk away with money instead of repair bills, and the Majestic stays connected to the Bell family." Nora folded the offer. "I haven't decided anything. Don't wait until the building decides for you." After he left, Nora carried the offer upstairs and placed it on Arthur's desk. Selling was sensible. For the first time in years, she had a chance to exchange uncertainty for financial security. Yet signing away the theater before understanding why Arthur had chosen her felt wrong. She began opening desk drawers, searching less for an answer than for some indication of what Arthur had been doing during his final months. Most contents were ordinary invoices, schedules, insurance correspondence, old programs. In a narrow drawer beneath the telephone, she found a calendar from the previous year. Arthur had written appointments in small, precise letters. Nora expected contractors, performers, accountants, donors. Instead, she found unfamiliar names mixed with a few she recognized. Harold Wynne, Teresa Cold, Evelyn Price, Samuel Ortiz, Margaret Lane. Several entries had phone numbers beside them. Evelyn returned from making coffee and glanced over Nora's shoulder. "Harold Wynne," Nora said. "Know him?" "Projectionist, retired years ago." Evelyn pointed to another name. "Teresa sold tickets before I became manager. Samuel worked backstage. Why was Arthur calling them, I don't know." Nora checked another calendar covering the months around the date Helen said Arthur had changed his will. More former employees appeared. Some appointments were marked call, others interview or records. "Was he planning some kind of reunion?" Nora asked. "Not that he told me." Evelyn studied the pages. "Arthur asked me questions last year about people who worked here in the 80s. I thought he was being nostalgic." "What kind of questions?" "Names, how long they stayed, what jobs they did. Who might still have photographs? Nora turned another page. Arthur had been systematically contacting retired employees before and after changing his will. Why? Evelyn shook her head. Arthur didn't explain himself unless he had to. Nora remembered the basement key in her purse. She took it out and placed it beside the calendars. Arthur had been visiting the locked basement during the same period. That could be coincidence, but it no longer felt like one. She spent another hour sorting papers. Near the bottom of a folder marked Personal, she found a single sheet containing a short list in Arthur's handwriting. Several names appeared beside dates. Nora recognized 2 from the calendars. At the bottom, separated from the rest, Arthur had written one additional line. Nora read it twice. Evelyn leaned closer. What does it say? Nora turned the page toward her. In Arthur's narrow handwriting were 4 words. Basement Nora will understand. The basement door stood at the end of a narrow service corridor behind the stage. Painted the same dull gray as the surrounding wall, Nora had passed it thousands of times without thinking much about what was below. Now Arthur's note made the door seem different. Basement Nora will understand. She turned the heavy key. The lock resisted, then released with a metallic click. Nora pulled. The door moved 2 inches and stopped. Of course, she muttered. She pulled harder. Something scraped against the other side. Don't force it. Marcus came down the corridor carrying a flashlight and work gloves. Nora had asked him to help because she didn't trust the basement stairs after years of limited use. Something's blocking it. He pushed carefully while Nora pulled. After several attempts, the gap widened enough for Marcus to shine his flashlight through. Old scenery flat fell against the door. He squeezed his arm through, shifted it, and eventually opened a passage wide enough for them. Cold, damp air rose from below. Nora switched on the basement light. One weak bulb illuminated steep wooden stairs. Arthur came down here alone, Marcus asked. Exactly. At 81, Arthur didn't enjoy being told what he shouldn't do. That's true. They descended slowly. Nora expected the basement she had always imagined: broken chairs, discarded costumes, old painted scenery, boxes of programs, perhaps props nobody had bothered throwing away. The first room partly matched that expectation. Rolled carpet leaned against one wall. 2 damaged lobby signs rested beneath a canvas sheet. A stack of old scenery flats narrowed the passage. But beyond them, Marcus's flashlight revealed another section. Nora stopped. Metal shelving units stood in orderly rows. Dozens of identical archival boxes filled them, each cleanly labeled. This doesn't look forgotten, Marcus said. Nora approached the nearest shelf. The labels were written in Arthur's familiar hand. Margaret Lane Box Office, 1986 to 1994. Samuel Ortiz Stage Crew, 1979 to 2008. Harold O'Wynn Projection, 1972 to 2001. Nora recognized the names from Arthur's calendars. These are employees. Marcus examined another shelf. All of them, I don't know. There were far more boxes than Nora expected. Some represented workers from decades before she arrived. Others carried names she remembered from her first years cleaning the theater. A sudden drip struck the concrete near her shoe. Marcus immediately looked upward. Another drop fell. That's not good. He followed the damp line along the ceiling toward an exterior wall. The concrete beneath one shelving unit was dark with moisture. We've got seepage. Nora crouched. Water had begun spreading beneath the bottom shelf. Are the boxes wet? Not yet, but they will be if this keeps moving. Curiosity disappeared beneath urgency. What do we do? Move everything away from this wall first. I'll figure out where the water's entering. They worked quickly. Nora carried boxes to the dry side, while Marcus shifted a shelving unit after it had been emptied. Every label made her want to stop. Evelyn Price, box office 1987 to 2020. Richard Mays, usher 1991 to 2014. Teresa Cole, tickets 1975 to 1989. Arthur had not simply stored payroll records. The boxes had been individually prepared and arranged by name. Nora lifted another and heard papers shift inside. She resisted opening it. Water first, questions later. Marcus traced the seepage to a deteriorated area near an exterior foundation joint. "Temporary fix today," he said. "Then we need someone to look at it properly." Nora stared at the damp concrete. "How much, I don't know yet. That's becoming my least favorite answer." Marcus gave her a sympathetic look. "You inherited an old building. I noticed." She looked at the shelves they had moved. For the first time since Helen read the will, the theater felt physically hers, in the worst possible way. If water damaged whatever Arthur had spent years organizing, it would happen while Nora was responsible. "I don't even know what these are, and I'm already failing to protect them." Marcus stopped working. "A leak that started before you owned the building isn't your failure. It's my problem now. That's different." He picked up his tools. "And being the owner doesn't mean you handle every problem alone." Nora helped him move the last boxes from danger. Once the floor beneath the shelving was clear, Marcus went upstairs for materials to slow the seepage. Nora remained among the rows. She began reading labels more carefully. Cleaners, ushers, projectionists, stagehands, maintenance workers, ticket sellers. Some boxes covered 3 years of service. Others covered 30. Arthur had organized the basement around people whose names had rarely appeared on the marquee. Nora walked farther down the final shelf. Then she stopped. A box sat at eye level, its label newer than many around it. She didn't need to move closer to recognize the name. Her own. Nora reached out but did not touch it. Beneath her name, Arthur had added only the length of time she had worked at the Majestic. Whitaker, Nora, 17 years. Nora stood before the box bearing her name until Marcus returned with sealant and the work light. "You going to open it?" he asked. "Not yet." She stepped away. "I want to understand the others first." The next morning, after Marcus had temporarily stopped the seepage, Evelyn joined Nora in the basement. Nora chose a box labeled Richard Mays, usher, 1991 to 2014. Inside were no valuables. There was an employee badge, several photographs, theater programs, a retirement card, and handwritten pages describing Richard's years at the Majestic. One photograph showed him standing beside 3 younger ushers beneath the marquee. Names were written carefully on the back. "Richard," Evelyn said softly. "He used to carry peppermints for nervous children." Nora remembered him. More importantly, she remembered one of the papers. "I found this." She lifted a folded, handwritten story about Richard helping an elderly patron down the balcony stairs during a power failure, years ago, after his locker was cleared. It was mixed with trash. "You gave it to Arthur?" "I left it in his office because Richard had written his name on it." Nora had forgotten the incident completely. Arthur had not. Another box belonged to Teresa Cole. It contained ticket stubs, photographs, notes from former co-workers, and a short account of how she once used her own umbrella to walk patrons to their cars during a storm. Samuel Ortiz's box held backstage photographs, maintenance notes, and a retirement letter thanking him for keeping performances running through countless equipment failures. "These aren't personnel files," Nora said. "No." Evelyn touched a photograph. "They're lives." Box after box followed the same pattern. Arthur had preserved ordinary moments alongside official records, as if a torn employee badge deserved the same care as an autographed program. Nora thought of all the years she had emptied trash after audiences left, beneath framed photographs of famous actors. Nobody framed the people who swept afterward. Footsteps sounded on the stairs. Julian appeared at the bottom, irritation replacing surprise when he saw the shelves. "Helen said you were going through Arthur's basement." Nora straightened. "We're trying to understand what he kept here. Without telling the family, I didn't know I needed permission. This is Bell family property." The words hung between them. Nora's first instinct was to apologize. Instead, she said, "Legally, it isn't anymore." Saying it felt unnatural, almost rude, but Julian had no immediate answer. His gaze moved across the boxes. "What is all this?" "Employee records, photographs, stories." "Then why are you treating them like some secret explanation? Because Arthur wrote that I would understand the basement." Julian shook his head. "Or you're interpreting everything he left behind to justify what happened." Evelyn stiffened. Nora raised a hand before she could respond. "I didn't ask Arthur to leave me anything." "I know that's what you keep saying. Because it's true. And I still don't understand why my uncle gave away a theater his family kept for generations." Nora looked at the shelves. "Neither do I. That's why I'm here." Julian left without another argument, but his accusation remained. Nora worried that she was doing exactly what he claimed, turning ordinary belongings into a story, because she needed Arthur's decision to make sense. Evelyn seemed to read her expression. "Facts don't become imaginary because Julian dislikes them. We still don't know what they mean." "Then keep looking." Near the rear shelving, Evelyn found several binders labeled Centennial. The Majestic had marked its 100th anniversary several years earlier. Nora remembered the celebration historical displays in the lobby, photographs of owners, famous touring performers, old advertisements, newspaper clippings. She opened the first binder. Arthur had saved planning notes and drafts. One page listed material included in the Centennial exhibition. Another contained handwritten additions. Evelyn pointed to a date. This was right after the anniversary. Attached was a list of employees Arthur had begun trying to identify from old photographs. Ushers, projectionists, cleaners, stagehands, ticket sellers. "Look," Nora said, "the earliest archive notes began immediately after the Centennial Project. That's when he started this." Evelyn nodded. "Maybe he noticed something missing?" On a lower shelf, they found a small digital recorder in a labeled case. A note identified an interview with Arthur himself. Nora hesitated, then pressed play. Static filled the basement before Arthur's familiar voice emerged. Older, quieter, but unmistakable. He spoke about the Centennial display and the photographs selected for the lobby. Owners had names. Performers had names. Important donors had names. Then Arthur paused. "I stood in front of a backstage photograph containing 11 people," his recorded voice said. The actor in the center was identified. 10 employees surrounding him were not. Nora looked at Evelyn. Arthur continued, "That was when I realized our official history was incomplete." Another pause followed, long enough that Nora nearly thought the recording had ended. Then Arthur said, "The official history is missing the people who kept this place alive." Nora replayed Arthur's final sentence twice before switching off the recorder. The basement seemed different afterward. What at first looked like rows of boxes now felt like an answer taking shape, though not yet complete. Over the next 2 days, she and Evelyn examined the archive carefully, while Marcus dealt with contractors assessing the seepage. Arthur had organized employees by name, job, and years of service. There were cleaners who had worked before Nora was born, projectionists from the days of film reels, musicians from traveling productions, ticket sellers, stagehands, maintenance workers, and ushers whose uniforms had changed 3 times during their employment. Some boxes contained formal records, Most held smaller things. A photograph of a stagehand repairing scenery minutes before a performance. A note about a ticket seller remembering a widower's preferred seat. A cleaner's handwritten complaint about a leaking pipe that Arthur had preserved beside a later photograph of the repaired ceiling. He kept everything. Nora said, "Not everything," Evelyn replied. "Things about people." That distinction stayed with Nora. In the box of a retired cleaner named Marlene Davis, Nora found an index card in Arthur's handwriting. Nora returned Marlene's scarf after retirement, drove it to her apartment rather than discard it. Nora frowned. "I remember that scarf. Apparently Arthur did too." Another employee file mentioned Nora helping a young usher cover shifts while his mother was hospitalized. Another recorded her identifying photographs left in an abandoned locker so they could be returned to a former stagehand. None of it seemed important enough to document. "Why was he writing things about me in other people's boxes?" Nora asked. Evelyn looked at her. "Maybe because you kept appearing in their stories." Nora closed the file. The idea made her uncomfortable. For 17 years, she had assumed her work became invisible the moment the floors dried and the trash disappeared. She preferred it that way. Being observed turned ordinary actions into evidence of something she wasn't sure she wanted defined. Upstairs, Marcus was waiting beside Arthur's office with 2 repair estimates. "You should sit down," he said. "That's never a good opening. The foundation seepage could be controlled, but permanent work would cost more than Nora hoped. The roof remained the larger problem, and the electrical panel could not be ignored indefinitely. Nora placed the estimates beside Julian's purchase offer. Setting would solve all of this. Marcus leaned against the desk. "For you, maybe. That's the point. Then why haven't you signed?" Nora glanced toward the basement key. "Because I still don't know why Arthur chose me." Marcus nodded toward the papers she had carried upstairs. "Seems like you're getting closer." "He documented me returning a scarf. Marcus, you drove across town after work to return that scarf. Because Marlene forgot it. Most people would have put it in lost and found. That's not extraordinary. Maybe that's your problem." Nora looked at him. "What? You think if something wasn't difficult for you, it didn't matter?" She started to object, then stopped. Marcus tapped the repair estimates. "I'm not telling you to keep the theater. I'm telling you not to call 17 years just a job because you're scared of what owning it means." After he left, Nora returned to the basement alone. She still avoided her own box. Instead, she opened Arthur's chronological index, a thick binder cross-referencing employee materials. His notes became more detailed after the Centennial Project. During the final 2 years, Nora's name appeared repeatedly. Nora helped Evelyn identify former ticket staff. Nora remembered Samuel's retirement year. Nora preserved photographs from Richard's locker. Nora contacted family after employee belongings were left backstage. The entries were factual, almost clinical. Yet their frequency increased sharply during the final 18 months of Arthur's life, the same period in which he had changed his will. Nora felt exposed. She remembered Arthur passing through hallways while she worked, asking questions she had considered meaningless. "Do you remember who worked projection before Harold? Whatever happened to the usher with the red glasses? Who did Evelyn say was in that photograph?" She had answered whenever she could, never realizing he was assembling anything from her responses. Nora checked the dates against the calendar she had found in Arthur's office. Former employees, interviews, records. Her name. Again and again, the pieces overlapped. Then she remembered Helen's exact wording. Arthur had executed the new will 18 months earlier. Nora turned backward through the index until she reached that period. Several entries appeared during the same month. She followed them day by day. One referred to an elderly former usher. Another mentioned photographs. Then she reached a page where Arthur's handwriting filled nearly half the space. The date made her stop. Nora retrieved her phone and checked the photograph she had taken of the will information Helen showed her. Same week. She sat down at the basement work table. Arthur had written this entry only days before changing his will. At the top was the name of a longtime usher Nora remembered. Beneath it, Arthur had written several words about discarded photographs, former employees, and Nora. She read the first sentence, then stared at the date again. Whatever had happened that week, Arthur had considered it important enough to record, and days later, he had decided that Nora Whitaker would inherit the Majestic. Nora read Arthur's entry again, from the beginning. The longtime usher was Richard Mays. 18 months earlier, Richard had died after years away from the Majestic. His family had cleared out a small storage locker he had kept near the theater and left several boxes to be discarded. Nora remembered the day only vaguely at first. Flattened cardboard by the loading entrance, old shoes, a broken umbrella, stacks of papers, photographs spilling from a torn envelope. Arthur's notes made the memory sharpen. Nora had stopped because she recognized the Majestic lobby in one photograph. Richard stood at the edge of the frame, much younger, surrounded by people Nora didn't know. Another photograph showed ushers beside the old ticket booth. None of the workers were named. Nora had carried the photographs inside rather than let them go into the dumpster. Arthur's entry continued. Nora identified Richard immediately. She asked Evelyn Price for help naming others, contacted former staff, returned copies to families, preserved originals. No instruction given. Nora sat back. She remembered calling Evelyn after her shift. Evelyn had recognized 3 employees. Marcus had remembered the son of an old stagehand. Nora had spent part of a Saturday making calls until most of the names were restored. At the time, she had thought only that people deserved to know who their relatives were standing beside. Arthur had apparently watched the entire process. His next sentence made her chest tighten. She did not ask whether the photographs were valuable. She asked who the people were. Nora closed her eyes. That was it. 17 years of work, and Arthur had changed his will because she had saved photographs from being thrown away. She kept reading. Arthur had listed earlier examples beside Richard's photographs, Marlene's scarf, Samuel's retirement papers, forgotten employee belongings. Names Nora remembered when nobody else did. Richard's photographs had not created Arthur's opinion. They had confirmed it. Near the bottom of the page, Arthur had written, "Ownership should pass to someone who understands what this building actually contains." Nora stared at the sentence. Not seats, not curtains, not the stage. People. Their time, their work, their memories. She found Julian in the lobby that afternoon. He had come to ask whether she had considered his offer. "Before we talk about selling," Nora said, "I want to show you something." She brought him to Arthur's office and placed a copy of the entry in front of him. Julian read silently. His expression tightened when he reached Richard's name. "I remember him," he said. "He used to work Christmas shows." Arthur remembered him too. Nora explained the discarded photographs and the employee archive downstairs. "Your uncle started documenting workers after the centennial celebration. He thought the theater's history left them out." Julian looked toward the closed office door. "And you think this explains the will?" "Part of it, because you saved some photographs not just once." Apparently Arthur had been watching things like that for years. Julian frowned. "That sounds strange. It feels strange." Nora sat across from him. "I don't like knowing he was making notes about me." "Then why defend it?" "I'm not defending it. I'm trying to understand it." Julian read Arthur's sentence again. "Someone who understands what this building actually contains." His anger had not disappeared, but it seemed less certain. He really wrote that before changing the will, days before? Julian folded the copy. I still think the theater should have stayed in the family. I know. But maybe he wasn't being irrational. It was the closest Julian had come to admitting that possibility. After he left, Nora returned to the repair estimates. Understanding Arthur did not make the numbers smaller. The roof still needed work. The electrical panel still needed replacing. The foundation seepage still required attention. Caring about history did not pay contractors. Nora went downstairs and stood among the archive shelves. Arthur's sentence followed her. What this building actually contains. She looked at names of cleaners, ushers, stagehands, projectionists, ticket sellers, and maintenance workers. Then she looked at the box she had avoided since the first day. Whitaker. Nora, 17 years. Maybe Arthur's decision had begun with Richard's photographs. Or maybe that day had only confirmed something he had seen long before. Either way, Nora knew she could not understand why he had trusted her while refusing to look at the one record he had made about her. She reached for the box and pulled it from the shelf. This time she did not put it back. Nora carried the box to the basement work table and sat down before opening it. For several seconds she only looked at her own name on the label. 17 years. Long enough that the number seemed to belong to someone else's life. She lifted the lid. On top lay a copy of her original employment form dated 17 years earlier. The address was the small apartment she had moved into after her divorce. Beneath it were photographs she had never seen Nora pushing a cleaning cart through the lobby during a holiday show, laughing with Evelyn beside the ticket counter, helping Marcus move chairs after a community event. None were posed. None made her look important. Arthur had simply preserved moments of her being there. There were notes, too. Nora remembered some incidents immediately. Others had vanished from her memory. Helped new usher find bus money after late shift. Stayed after cleaning to wait with Teresa's granddaughter until ride arrived. Returned former employee photographs to family. Remembered Harold's preferred coffee when he visited after retirement. Nora stopped reading. He wrote all this down? She whispered. Arthur had apparently noticed things Nora herself had considered too ordinary to remember. At the bottom of the first stack was a small envelope marked Final. Nora's hands became unsteady. She opened it and unfolded several pages in Arthur's familiar handwriting. The first sentence made her sit straighter. Nora, if you are reading this, then the theater is yours, and you are probably wondering why. She read on. Arthur wrote that ownership had taught him something he had understood too late. Buildings acquired reputations through performers, donors, and families whose names appeared on programs, but they survived because of people whose names rarely appeared anywhere. Ushers who calmed frightened children, maintenance workers who repaired failures before audiences noticed, ticket sellers who remembered regular patrons, stagehands who solved disasters behind curtains, cleaners who restored order after everyone else left. Nora's vision blurred. Arthur wrote that the centennial celebration had forced him to confront how incomplete the Majestic's official history was. He had begun documenting workers because he realized the theater had preserved famous names while allowing ordinary ones to disappear. Then he wrote about Nora for 17 years. I watched you behave as though no person in this building was disposable. Nora stopped. She pressed the heel of her hand beneath one eye and continued. Arthur described no grand sacrifice, no single heroic act. Instead, he listed patterns Nora returned belongings nobody else valued. She remembered former employees after they left. She treated backstage workers with the same respect she gave visiting performers. She preserved photographs because the people in them mattered even when nobody recognized their names. Arthur wrote that Richard Mays's photographs had confirmed what he had already believed. When Nora found them, she did not ask whether they were valuable. She asked who the people were. Then came the line she had been searching for since Helen read the will. I am not leaving you the Majestic because you cleaned it for 17 years. I am leaving it to you because for 17 years you showed me what stewardship looks like, without ever calling it that. Nora lowered the pages. She had expected some practical explanation, perhaps gratitude for loyalty or guilt from an elderly employer who felt he owed her something. Instead, Arthur had given meaning to years Nora herself had minimized. She began crying quietly, not because she owned a theater, but because somebody had considered her life inside it worth documenting. Footsteps approached. Marcus and Evelyn appeared at the end of the aisle. Nora wiped her face, but did not hide the letter. "You opened it," Evelyn said. Nora nodded. Arthur explained why. She read the final pages aloud. Marcus listened with his arms folded, looking at the floor whenever Nora's voice broke. Evelyn cried openly. Arthur's statement ended with a request, not a command. The basement archive should not remain hidden forever. If possible, employee stories should be preserved, organized, and eventually made accessible so future audiences understood whose labor had sustained the Majestic. Nora finished and placed the pages carefully on the table. Marcus exhaled. That sounds like Arthur. It sounds like a lot of responsibility. Nora said. Evelyn touched the edge of Nora's box. He thought you could carry it. Thinking I can doesn't repair the roof. No, it doesn't replace the electrical panel or stop water coming through that wall. Marcus nodded. Those problems are still real. Nora looked around the basement. Understanding Arthur's intention had solved the mystery of why he chose her, but it had not changed the financial reality waiting upstairs. Julian's offer still sat on Arthur's desk. Selling would still be easier. Nora looked again at her employment form. At 17 years reduced to paper and photographs. At all the moments she had believed disappeared because no one important had seen them. Then she folded Arthur's letter and returned it to the envelope. I'm still going to look at every number, she said. Every repair, every option. Marcus nodded. You should. Nora placed the lid back on her box. But this time she did not return it to the shelf as something she was afraid to face. But I'm not selling the Majestic just because I'm afraid I don't belong here. Nora met Julian and Helen in Arthur's office 3 days later. Julian's purchase offer still lay in the drawer where Nora had placed it, but this time she did not take it out. Instead, she set copies of Arthur's final statement and several archive records on the desk. I've decided not to sell the Majestic, she said. Julian leaned back. Because of the basement? Because I finally understand why Arthur left it to me. Helen remained silent while Nora explained the Centennial Project, the employee archive, Richard Mays's photographs, and Arthur's belief that the theater's official history had ignored the people who kept it operating. Julian read Arthur's statement slowly. He really thought we forgot them? Not just your family, Nora said. All of us. I worked here 17 years and still thought history meant the people on the posters. Julian turned through several photographs. One showed an old Bell family gathering in the lobby surrounded by theater employees. Arthur had identified everyone he could. Julian touched the image. That's my father. Arthur wasn't removing your family from the history, Nora said. He was adding the people standing beside them. Julian looked at her. Some of the defensiveness left his face. I thought giving you the building meant he didn't care whether it stayed connected to us. Maybe he wanted the connection to become larger. Julian looked away. When Helen read the will, I was angry because I thought the Majestic was supposed to be mine. He paused. But I think part of it was simpler than that. Arthur died, and then suddenly the building was gone too. It felt like losing him twice. Nora understood that better than she expected. You don't have to own the Majestic to still belong to its history. Julian gave a faint smile. Apparently that's the lesson. Helen brought them back to the practical problem. Understanding Arthur's intentions doesn't improve the theater's balance sheet. I know, Nora opened a folder. She had spent days with Marcus, separating urgent repairs from work that could wait. The foundation seepage needed proper treatment. The electrical panel required attention. The roof could be repaired in stages rather than replaced immediately if contractors agreed the structure remained sound. I can't restore everything at once, Nora said, so I'm not going to pretend I can. She outlined a modest plan: keep performances operating, address safety and water problems first, seek preservation grants where the building qualified, organize local fundraising, and begin protecting the archive professionally before making portions available to the public. Evelyn had already contacted former employees willing to contribute photographs and memories. Marcus had identified repairs that volunteers could assist with safely and those requiring licensed contractors. Julian studied the numbers. There's still a shortfall. Yes. You could fail. Yes. Nora surprised herself by how easily she said it. But selling because failure is possible isn't the same as making a responsible decision. Helen nodded. That's a more realistic plan than trying to renovate the entire property immediately. Julian tapped one of the Bell photographs. I have family materials Arthur never had. Programs, photographs, correspondence. Nora waited. If this archive is supposed to tell the whole story, he continued, those should probably be here too. I'd like that it was not reconciliation in a dramatic sense. Julian still disagreed with Arthur's decision. Nora still remembered how quickly he had assumed she did not deserve the inheritance. But they no longer needed one of them to lose for the other to have a place in the majestic. Over the following week, Nora, Evelyn, and Marcus prepared a small employee history display for the lobby. They chose reproductions rather than risking original archive materials. Evelyn found photographs of ticket sellers. Marcus selected an image showing stagehands repairing scenery between performances. Nora included Richard Mays with the ushers whose names she had helped recover. Beneath each photograph were names, jobs, and years of service. You're missing someone, Evelyn said as they arranged the final panel. Nora looked over the display. Who? Evelyn handed her a photograph Arthur had kept in Nora's box. Nora pushing her cleaning cart through the lobby during a holiday show. Absolutely not. Why? Because I'm putting this together, and it feels like giving myself an award. Marcus, standing on a ladder nearby, looked down. It's an employee history. Were you an employee? You know I was. For how long? Nora glared at him. Don't start. Evelyn placed the photograph beside the others. Arthur's entire point was that people disappear from history because someone decides their ordinary work isn't important enough to record. You're doing the same thing to yourself. Nora looked at the image. 17 years earlier? She would have been embarrassed to imagine anyone preserving a photograph of her cleaning. Even now, part of her wanted to remove it before anyone saw. Then she remembered Arthur's letter. No person in this building was disposable. That had to include her. Nora printed the label herself. Nora Whitaker Cleaning Staff, 17 years. She fixed it beneath the photograph, then stepped back. Her name was not above Richard's, Evelyn's, Marcus's, or anyone else's. It stood among them. For the first time. Nora left it there. 6 months later, the Majestic Theater still had a roof that needed more work. A plumbing system Marcus insulted at least twice a week, and an operating account Nora checked more often than she checked the weather. It was also still open on a Saturday evening. The lobby filled with former employees, families, regular patrons, and people who had come carrying photographs in envelopes. The employee history display had grown beyond the first panel. Copies of backstage photographs lined one wall. Beneath them were names that once would have been missing ushers, cleaners, projectionists, musicians, ticket sellers, stagehands, maintenance workers. Evelyn stood before an old photograph of the box office with her hand over her mouth. "They found Margaret Lane," she told Nora. "Her daughter called this morning. She has more photographs." "Good. Get her number before she leaves." Evelyn smiled. "Listen to you giving orders. I'm making a suggestion. You're the owner." Nora, 6 months earlier. Nora would have corrected her. She would have said she was still figuring things out, or that Arthur had only left her the building, as though ownership were an administrative error. This time she simply said, "Then the owner suggests you get her number." Evelyn laughed and hugged her. Across the lobby, Marcus was showing 2 visitors a display about maintenance crews. He had reluctantly allowed Nora to include a photograph of himself repairing an aisle light. "I look terrible," he had complained. "History is cruel," Nora had told him. Julian arrived carrying a flat archival box. He had become a regular contributor without attempting to control the project. Inside were Bell family programs, correspondence, and photographs that connected Arthur's relatives to generations of theater employees. "Found these in my father's things," he said. Nora opened the box carefully. One photograph showed a Bell family member beside a projectionist whose name Arthur's archive had identified. "This belongs here," Nora said. Julian nodded. "I know." He looked around the crowded lobby. Arthur would have complained about people touching the glass. Arthur complained about fingerprints while creating an archive in a damp basement. Fair point. Their relationship was not effortless, but resentment no longer defined every conversation. Julian had not stopped wishing Arthur had spoken to him more openly before changing the will. Nora did not pretend that hurt was unreasonable, but the majestic no longer represented something one of them had to possess for the other to belong. Downstairs, the basement had changed more slowly. The foundation seepage had been repaired first. Archival materials were raised from the floor, sensitive originals placed in protective sleeves and containers, and a growing catalog recorded what Arthur had collected. The basement itself remained closed to general visitors while the materials were protected, but reproductions upstairs made the stories accessible. Former employees began adding their own memories. One family brought an usher's badge. Another contributed photographs of musicians backstage. A retired cleaner mailed Nora 3 handwritten pages about working overnight during winter performances. There was no hidden collection of valuable props. No forgotten fortune waited behind the shelves. What Arthur had protected was less profitable and, Nora now understood, more fragile evidence that ordinary people had been there. The majestic survived through equally ordinary solutions. A preservation grant helped with part of the electrical work. Community fundraising covered several urgent repairs. Ticket revenue improved modestly as more people returned for performances and history events. The roof was repaired in stages. Nothing happened overnight. And every solved problem seemed to reveal another invoice. Nora preferred that reality to a miracle. Late that evening, after the final visitors left, she walked through the auditorium carrying a cleaning cloth tucked into her pocket. A young volunteer had offered to finish wiping the lobby displays, but Nora had automatically taken one section herself. Ownership had changed her responsibilities, not her belief that ordinary work mattered. She found Marcus near the stage. "Owner shouldn't be cleaning after her own event," he said. "Maintenance technicians shouldn't be standing around watching her." "I was supervising." "Go home." "Marcus?" "Yes, boss." She threw the cloth at him. He caught it laughing and disappeared backstage. Nora climbed to the balcony and paused beside row B, seat 14. Arthur's old seat remained exactly where it had always been. For a moment, she remembered the night he died, when she had brushed crumbs from that cushion and regretted never thanking him for giving her a job when she needed stability most. Now she understood that gratitude had moved in both directions. Arthur had given her work. She had given 17 years of care to a place he loved. Neither debt needed to be measured. Downstairs again, Nora passed the employee display before turning off the lobby lights. Her photograph remained among the others, cleaning cart. Holiday decorations. Tired smile. Nora Whitaker, cleaning staff, 17 years. She no longer felt embarrassed seeing it. Beside her were people whose names had almost disappeared from the Majestic's history. Evelyn Price, Richard Mays, Samuel Ortiz, Teresa Cole, Harold Wynn. Workers who had sold tickets, repaired equipment, guided audiences, cleaned floors, moved scenery, and kept performances alive while applause went to someone else. Nora took Arthur's final statement from the office drawer and read the line she had memorized. I am not leaving you the Majestic because you cleaned it for 17 years. I am leaving it to you because for 17 years you showed me what stewardship looks like without ever calling it that. For most of her life, Nora had separated usefulness from worth. Useful people worked quietly. Important people had their names displayed. Arthur's archive had exposed how false that division was. The Majestic's history existed because ordinary people had kept showing up. She was one of them. Nora returned the letter to its envelope and began switching off the house lights. One row at a time. Darkness settled gently over the red seats. At the lobby entrance, she stopped beside the employee display and looked once more at all those names. For 17 years, Nora Whitaker had believed she was simply cleaning up after the Majestic's history. Only after Arthur Bell left her everything did she understand that she had been part of that history all along.